Okay, right. Which is sort of the other way it comes around. Right.
That was a bar.
Right.
Other amusements. People that owned it. You know, they were there. So. The restaurant.
Right.
It is.
Yeah, the plaque talks about like sawmill or something. Right. Right, sure. Right. Who's the mayor? Yeah, okay, that's the. Right, sure. Right.
So he flung it into
So you serve. Right. The high school is kind of at the end of it. Right? We just went to the library. Yeah, right, we went down there.
On that side, the more.
Right. It was like the ghost. There must be some good stories about that. Right, right.
He opened it up.
Right. Sure. Oh, it's coming this way. Yeah. Is that the jail? It's under the boat?
Same day that
Like golf course or something. Yeah, that's a take it. Yes. No. Never know. Yeah, no, that was scary. And I must say that the large park is the best bathroom in Hudson County. Right. I've said the best in Hudson County. The best I know the year.
Have the street that they brought in. So, using this, opened it up.
We're talking about the golf. Right, sure. Okay, we're gonna start pretty soon here. Let's see, testing. Okay, we're gonna get going here. I think I need a little more amplification. Everyone got a seat? Most chairs are filled, so that means we should start. Welcome inside the Hoboken Historical Museum. You always get scared when you do something like this. 20 minutes, there was no one here, and I'm looking a little nervously at Bill, but thank you for walking in the door. My name is Bob Foster. I'm the director of the museum, and just want to start off by thanking Holly Metz. She's right here. Raise your hand. Holly, yep. Holly put together this exhibit. She curated it and shepherded it with McKevin Shaughnessy, the designer. And a lot of this is original research and has never really been presented. It's a little hard to see when we have, 40 or so people in here. So we urge you to come back. And also the good news is we're also doing a publication to accompany the exhibit, which a lot of people have actually requested. So that's pretty cool. Things are going well here in the Hoboken Historical Museum. The rest of the country's kind of going to pot on many levels, but we're doing okay. I hope it doesn't trickle down. And today we're really happy to have Captain Bill Sheehan. Just doing a really short introduction, but Bill Sheehan has created an incredible organization. You have his newsletter in front of you. We urge you to become a member. And he's been doing it since he's probably a little kid. But I mean, in a sense, really taking in the Meadowlands when a lot of people said, what is this place? But in 1997, he formed the organization that you're seeing with the newsletter. And he probably started with half a kayak, and he's built it into an armada of kayaks, canoes, pontoon boats, the whole shebang. So he has a great set of slides, and he's gonna sort of give you a great tour of the Meadowlands and probably a little bit about his organization. I last saw Bill maybe, I don't know, 10 years ago. He did another presentation here, and he's dropped, can I say 50 pounds? Something like that. So he's looking great, looking fit. He wants to keep up with the youngins, he said. So let's give him the warmest welcome for being here and doing what he does. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. And thank you for that great introduction. I'm happy to be here in Hoboken, the previous swamp called Hoboken. I have a thing about swamps, Let me see. I want to make sure I have this thing pointing in the right direction. Oh, there we go. All right, that's the first slide. This is the Hackensack River watershed. The Hackensack River watershed is roughly about 210 square miles, mostly in Bergen County, some in Hudson County, and some up in Rockland County, New York. The reservoir district is up top. I'm jumping ahead. The river is 45 miles long, and it covers 2 states, 3 counties, 64 municipalities, and 1.5 million consumers of potable water are dependent on the Hackensack River. If the river is bad, no drinking water. We can't have that. All right, let me see. There we go. These are the 2 areas that were allegedly under control back in the 90s. The top part was the reservoir district, which was controlled at that time by United Water. United Water inherited that from the Hackensack Water Company, which was founded in the late 1800s. And then now we've gone through 2 more owners, and now we're dealing with a company called Veolia, a French company that owns the whole water delivery system. The bottom half down there is the Meadowlands District. The Meadowlands District was a great idea when the state thought of it. Unfortunately, the wrong people were working it. You know, when they, when they looked at the Meadowlands, they thought there's gold in that there swamp. Seriously. We're going to start the trip down the river from the top of the river watershed. And whether you know it or not, you look at the Hackensack River in Secaucus. This is the Hackensack River in Rockland County. Just a couple of streams that come together and start building up some momentum. A little bit more water starts coming. And not long after that, back in the 1800s, somebody decided, what a great place to put a community. So they put a dam in and created what we call Lake Lucille. And around the entire lake, there are residential housing, and it's a private conclave. Like you have to have permission to go there. If they catch you riding around in there, they throw you out. Not a good way to start a river with public access denied, right? The next big stop for the river is Lake DeForest. Lake DeForest up at the top, that's the Hudson River up there. And that's Westchester County. And this is Lake DeForest. Lake DeForest is the newest of the reservoirs. It was built in the 1960s, I believe. And that's just a shot of the dam at Lake DeForest. I'll go this way. And the next big stop for the river is Lake Tappan. Lake Tappan is another storage reservoir. By storage, I mean they just collect the water there. And then when Oradell Reservoir, which is the service reservoir, starts getting low, they pump water from one to the other. They also have a connection to the Pompton River, where when things are really bad, they can actually draw water into the Meadowlands or into the Hackensack watershed from the Pompton River, which is a transfer of water. And we don't go along with that. That was done before I was on the job. And Woodcliff Lake. Woodcliff Lake was a little lake, and they decided to make it a third reservoir to store water. And the people that live around Woodcliff Lake, they live in very, very fancy homes, very expensive real estate, and they get flooded all the time. Not a great place to live, but tell that to Bergen County. What can I say? This is what the river looks like when it's going through Rivervale, New Jersey. That's the on the bottom. That's the Cherry Brook where it comes in, and this is the main stem of the Hackensack after it comes out of the reservoirs. And of course, the terminal reservoir, how's that for a term? The terminal reservoir. But that's it. That's the last dam on the river, really. And that's where this sits. This is the state-of-the-art water treatment plant, which was built many years ago now, but it was built to the specifications, the highest specifications you could have. People, when I see people in the supermarket in my watershed buying bottled water, I say, why are you doing that? Because we have the best water around this area. You go a few miles west and you're in the Passaic River watershed, the water's terrible. You come over here and you get your water. Where do you get your water from? Where does Hoboken get its water from? Veolia manages your system. Where's your reservoir? Houghton? Yeah, there you go. Now that's another interbasin transfer that I was talking about before. We've been doing this to the state since the 1700s. You need water here, there's no water. You got water over here, you move it here. And it seems to make sense from a development perspective, but it makes no sense from an ecological perspective. And all it has done is create damage and harm to the ecosystems that are supposed to be here. Oh, yes. And that's the Oradell Dam, the terminal dam. There's another use of that word. But this area over here to the right, this whole thing right here, this whole area right in here all belongs to the county now. It belongs to Bergen County. And down here is the original water treatment plant. Back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, they started pumping water further and further. And the way it started was Hackensack, they were having a problem with their water. And so a bunch of the very influential businessmen in Hackensack founded the Hackensack Water Company. And they built a very small reservoir up in New Milford, or River Edge rather, and they called it the Cherry Hill Reservoir. And that brought water into Hackensack, and everybody in Hackensack was happy with the water. But everybody around Hackensack was like, hey, why can't we have some of that? So the Hackensack Water Company, being a for-profit business, said, we'll supply it for a fee. And that's when they built it out. And now, you saw that number at the beginning of this show, there's like 1.5 million people that depend every day when they turn on the tap that the Hackensack River is going to be flowing. And also, right next to that old treatment plant there where it says Van Buskirk Island on the bottom, right next to that is where our third and very prosperous paddling center is. Bergen County asked us to open one up there a couple of years ago, and we did. And it's a very, very quiet paddle on that part of the river, and people love it. This is the weir, and this is the weir that separates the tidal river from the rest of the river. The tide will smack up against the front of that weir, but it doesn't go over it. So what you see pouring out of there is fresh water. The wrong button. Sorry. The next section is from River Edge down. This is the River Edge launch ramp. We do a lot of cleanups in River Edge. We use this launch ramp, but we have to be very careful about the tides, as you can see. When at high tide, you can launch almost any kind of boat you want. But if you don't get back before the tide goes out, you got a 6-hour wait for it to come back. And that mud is not pretty. And there's a turtle. That's a snapping turtle who just happened to crawl up out of the river looking for a place to nest. And this is probably the most historical spot on the entire Hackensack River. This is Newbridge Landing. Why is Newbridge Landing so historic? Well, it was owned by the Zabriskie family back in colonial times. If you drive through Bergen County, you see Zabriskie everywhere. But they were one of the founding families in Bergen County. And they were very unique because they were the only bridge on the entire Hackensack River in colonial times. If you wanted to get from the other side from one side of the river to the other, you either took a boat or you swam, or you went over this bridge, this one and only bridge that they had at Newbridge Landing. Well, luckily for us, George Washington knew that. And when he was under attack by the British in New York and hustled his butt to Fort Lee, and then realized when he was in Fort Lee that they were coming for him there, that was when the Great Retreat took place. You drive through North Jersey, you see signs on poles sometimes that say retreat route, and it's got a picture of a colonial soldier with the tricorner hat. That's what it's about. That retreat was Washington's troops getting away from the British. And the way they did it was they split the force. All the camp followers went through what today is Ridgefield Park, and all the fighting forces went through what today is Hackensack on this side, River Edge on this side, and Teaneck on this side, on the other side. So he got all his troops mustered and across the bridge onto the Zabriskie property without any trouble, and then ordered the bridge to be burnt, stranding the British on the east side of the river. It was November. And in those days, if you got wet in November, you were lucky if you made it through the winter, because there was no dryers. There was no, it was just, you got wet in those woolen clothes that they wore. It was like the British didn't want no part of it. So they went looking for boats. And while they were out looking for boats, Washington and his fighting force were able to make their escape out to Pennsylvania, and eventually they settled into Valley Forge and then Morristown. And, you know, the rest of the Revolutionary War history, if you didn't pay attention in school, I'm not going to teach it to you. But that was an important thing. And that's the newest bridge that was ever put there by the Zabriskie property. And that's a pedestrian bridge today. It used to have cars on it, but they took them off years ago. And now on one side is Teaneck, and on the other side is River Edge, and the historic site here. And on the other side is Brett Park. They call it Brett Park in Teaneck. Fairleigh Dickinson University is one of the largest property owners along the Hackensack River. People don't realize that, but they have a campus that straddles the river. Half of their buildings are in Hackensack, and there's a pedestrian bridge that connects them to the other half of their buildings, which are in Teaneck. And to give credit where credit is due, when I started Riverkeeper in 1997, I did it the same way that everybody else starts a grassroots movement, on my dining room table with a couple of friends. But it didn't take long for me to realize I had to escape from the dining room table, because at the time, the wife I had thought because I was home, I was at her beck and call, even though I could be on the phone with a senator or a congressman. Come on, we got to go. No, we don't. I'm working. You're not working. I can't relive that. But one night I was invited to speak at Fairleigh Dickinson University. They were holding a special meeting to discuss public access along the river. And I got an invite to be on the panel. And after the thing was over, one of the professors, a guy named Rick Isquith that ran the natural sciences department, he cornered me and he said, well, would you come to the college? If we could find a spot for you, would you want to have an office here? You could be in residence at I said, I'll be in residence at a college? Sure. So they gave us a room that was about as big as this area that we're standing in right here, but it got me off the table and got me into the building stage. By the time I left Fairleigh Dickinson, about 2002, I had 5 employees, and it was so small that we could actually reach out and touch each other while we were working, you know, and that's how tight it was. But then we got into our first building in 231 Main Street. And anybody thinking about the nonprofit world and getting an organization started, or you got to have an office. You got to have a place of business. You got to have a place where people can come to you and ask questions, that can gather information. And even once you have that, I'll go one step further. You have to own it. A dear friend of mine who runs what he calls the Bat Cave out in Garfield. He has animals. He has a whole menagerie of animals, and he does programs for children all the time where he lets them see these animals, lets them touch the animals if it's safe. And he's been doing a lot of stuff. He always works on our projects. When we do a public event, if we need vendors, he comes and shows off his bats, or he shows off his snakes or whatever. Well, when he was losing his roof, he called me up with some advice, and I told him, whatever you do, don't rent. You got to figure out a way to own it. He rented. And needless to say, after he put $10,000 into the building, they sold it out from under him. And now he's homeless for his animals. His animals are homeless. He's got some of them being stored at the animal shelter. Some of them are being stored at the Paramus Zoo, you know, Bensalem Park. And he's been looking and looking and looking for a place to set up his program again. Can't find one. Not with the Bergen County rents, that's for sure. This is the view from the Hackensack side, looking over towards Ridgefield Park. And you see that dock with the pontoon boat tied up to it and the kayaks in there. Ridgefield Park has always been a partner to Hackensack Riverkeeper. They were one of the first municipalities to see the value in what I was trying to get done. And in 2012, when Sandy came through, their dock that they had there, they had a wooden dock there that was used by the Wanda Canoe Club and anybody else that needed to use the dock, but it got ripped out and it disappeared in the storm. And we happened to have some Green Acres money in an account, and we talked to Green Acres if we could move that money into Ridgefield Park so that they could get a new dock. And we had a new dock in time for the season in 2013. You know, everybody else was still scrambling, trying to figure out what to do next. And we had a brand new dock. And that was 2013 when we had the grand opening for it. That's the Kips Bend, they call it on the river. They call that Kips Bend. And on the left side is Hackensack. On the right side is Teaneck. We own that area. And you can see that guy with the white hair. We have several nesting pairs of eagles in the Meadowlands now, and up and down the river. Up around the reservoirs, they have them. Down in the Meadowlands, they have them. Even down in Kearney, we had a nest going for about 5 years, but I don't think it's viable anymore. I think something happened. Come on. The world famous Route 46 bridge, that's an older picture, so that was done before they redid it. But to everybody's delight, when they redid it in the image of the original bridge. The only thing they didn't do was fix the lift. So now it's permanent locked in that position. And that means any boats that want to go up to Hackensack that are taller than the bridge is low, they can't make it. Yeah. And now we're getting down into the Meadowlands. And that quote on the left side comes from the United States Fish and Wildlife Service, if you can't read it. That was in 1998 when we were up to our hips in battle with the Meadowlands Commission at the time, with the state of New Jersey at the time, with the Army Corps of Engineers and the EPA at the time. We were fighting tooth and nail to save what was left of the Meadowlands. And Fish and Wildlife Service came to our rescue. They were really good. And if you can't read that way in the back of the room, it says, the Meadowlands are the largest and best example of brackish wetlands in the harbor ecosystem, and one of the last open spaces in the urban core. Worth saving. And this will give you an idea of why we were so upset. This is a 1940s vintage USGS map of what we call the Meadowlands. You look there and you see all this is open space. Wherever you see this hatching, that's wetlands. And this is the Hackensack River flowing up through it. Now, by 1995, that's what they did. All those buildings are so big that they get their own icons on the map. Warehouses, factories, whatever they decide, and don't forget a sports complex. You know, 1,000 acres was used up by the sports complex alone. And then that just instigated more development because now we had a draw to bring people here, but there was no place for them to stay. There was no, you know, so it was all the whole sports complex thing. Everybody likes to think it was about the football, but it was really about the development dollars. And Losen Slope Creek is another creek in the Meadowlands. Actually, in Little Ferry, it flows down, and Little Ferry gets flooded a lot because of this creek. There's a tide gate on the creek, which is supposed to prevent the river from getting in. And one of the geniuses that worked for the town in Little Ferry before Sandy locked the gates on the tide gate. And when Sandy hit, it topped the gate. They couldn't even open the gate for days after the storm. They had to actually scramble to find pumps and to find generators to run the pumps and then pump the town out into the river. That's why if you remember, we were watching them still evacuating people from their homes 3 days after the storm when everybody else was mopping up. Oh, there's one of our pontoon boats. That's my pontoon boat. All right, we have two of them. And the bridge over my head there, that's the Turnpike Western Extension. Comes up through the Meadowlands on the west side of the Hackensack River and then crosses back over the river from Moonachie over to Ridgefield. And then it joins up with the other road that comes up, the one that they say takes you to the Lincoln Tunnel, but only takes you to or more traffic than you ever want to see in your life. Ah, yes. Mill Creek Marsh. I was telling a story to Bob over there. Back in the 90s, Mill Creek Point was a restaurant, a shooting gallery where they did target practice. There was a launch ramp there. Earlier than that, there was a marina there where guys actually kept their boats on docks. And the reason they kept their boats there in those days was because there were no barnacles, because the river was so badly polluted that barnacles couldn't even survive. But Mill Creek Marsh, at the end of Mill Creek Marsh is where the Mill Creek Point Park is now. I convinced the mayor and the council in Secaucus that that would be a great place for a park, and they agreed. And now my mayor, who's my mayor now, Mike Ganelli, he and I have been wreaking havoc with the public for years. We've opened up so many parks and so many places along the river where you can go. If you just want to sit and watch the water flow, that's a good thing. If you want to go fishing, there's a fishing dock. If you want to go boating, there's places to launch your boat, you know? And little by little, we're making the river much more accessible, not only for the people of Secaucus, but for people throughout the watershed. There's one of our great blue herons. And that's just one of those shots. That's the Chrysler building in the background. You know, how do you look that close to the Chrysler building when it's in the middle of the marsh? Come on. There's some of our great egrets. They're just starting to show up. I saw a couple this past week when I was out roaming around a little bit. But by the time the real warm weather gets here, there'll be thousands of them. And anybody wants a real treat, if you like birds, around sunset, just before sunset in Secaucus, right across from that new development they put in called the Exchange, there's a pond, and there's trees around that pond, and all the egrets that inhabit the entire Meadowlands at night go into those trees, and it looks like snow on the tree limbs. There's so many birds there. And there's my other captain, that's Captain Yu, on his way out to his boat to start a trip. And see the little guy in the corner? Yeah, we've had harbor seals up the Hackensack more often than not. And a lot of times I think that they're just not seen because they come and they go. They don't like it here. They just follow the bait. See, when the herring are running, especially this time of year, the seals start feeding on the herring and they follow them. And the herring are going for fresh water. So sometimes the seals wind up all the way up the Hackensack in the Secaucus, Karlstad area. And these are just some of the bridges that cross the river and Giant Stadium. I think I said enough about that place. And there's the, I'm sorry to say, the Lautenberg train station. Frank Lautenberg was a great environmentalist, and they named that thing after him, you know? The biggest boondoggle to ever hit Secaucus. First off, when they decided to build it, the only reason they built it was because there was a congressman named Bob Rowe who had left Congress because the last piece of legislation that he got through was called ICE-T, the Intermodal Surface Transit law that said putting people on trains and stuff is a good thing. And so when he quit being in Congress, he got all the tax maps and he found out who owned the land along the railways. And it just so happened that Allied Outdoor Advertising owned a lot of land. I don't know if anybody used to ride the turnpike back in the day, but there used to be a whole string of billboards on the east side of the turnpike as you were heading up toward the city. And most of the time they had advertising on them for shows that were playing on Broadway. And that was Allied Outdoor Advertising. But the guy that owned that company couldn't exist on the rent. He had to make $1 billion or something. So he got hooked up with Bob Rowe, and Bob Rowe pushed it through. And they told us in a public hearing in Clarendon School in Secaucus, they were going to have a 1-seat ride from Secaucus to Washington, D.C. That was a selling point. And they got their permits and they started working on the project. And then Amtrak put out a press release that said, we have no intention of stopping there. We have a stop in New York and we have a stop in Newark. We don't need another stop because railroads live on their time and another stop would have changed the entire schedule. So there we are. In order to get to DC by train, you can go here, but you have to take a transit train to Newark, get off, and then take an Amtrak train to Washington. Not what we were promised. And there's some folks out on the Sawmill Creek Wildlife Management Area. Our initial paddling center is at Laurel Hill County Park in Secaucus. And right across the river from Laurel Hill County Park is this marvelous marsh called Sawmill Creek Wildlife Management Area. And we do guided tours out there all summer long. And we also rent kayaks and canoes to people that just want to go out on their own and explore. And it was never happening on the river. That was something that was never happening on the Hackensack River. People thought you weren't allowed to do it. I had to prove to them that you were allowed to do it. And, standing here in Joe Barry's project, I got to tell you, who really gave me the biggest break when it came to paddling? Bobby Januszewski. Bobby Januszewski was the county executive. I went to his office. I said to him, County executive, what do you think of the idea of renting canoes and kayaks out at Laurel Hill County Park? And he looked at me like, that's why we built that park? I said, well, I'm here to tell you that that's why I want to do it. And he's ordered the Parks Department to build us a little compound to store the boats in and gave us permission. And we went to, I can't even tell you, we still jump through hoops every year to do it. But everybody gets a chance to get out on the river under their own power if they want to do that. They thought it was illegal back in the day. And that's the ramp at Laurel Hill. It's been improved since that picture was taken, but that'll give you an idea. Look at the moon up there. That's probably one of our moonlight paddles that shot was taken from. And this year, I'll be getting to this in a little while when I start talking about what we do. But this is a fishing pier that we have now in Laurel Hill County Park in Secaucus. And the reason I had this fishing pier built was because when we sued the Honeywell Corporation, we forced Honeywell, on the second case we did, we forced them to establish a community benefits fund. And I was in charge of how the money would be spent to a certain degree. So I told them, Hudson County Improvement Authority, I said, I've got this wad of money. Let's do a fishing pier. They said, that's a great idea. So we worked out a deal with them, and the court said it was a good thing. And a couple of $1 million went into it. But every day you go by there's somebody out there fishing. There's somebody out there walking. People go out there at sunset during the summertime. More cameras on there than anywhere else, phones, cameras, whatever. They're taking pictures all the time. And we also run fishing clinics there. Like we partner with the Hudson River Fishermen's Association. They come and they work with the kids, and we give them all the stuff they need, and everybody has a good time. Hand out prizes for the kids too. That was wrong. That was not what I thought it was. Anyway, here's a couple of osprey for you, some more wildlife. Osprey were nowhere in the Meadowlands when I was young. They couldn't be here because there were very few fish, and they live on fish. And again, late 90s, a pair of osprey tried building a nest near the public service plant in Jersey City. And I went down there and I looked, and we knew that the nest was going to fail because it was on top of a piling that was like about 80 stories high. It was one of those big tall poles. And but I used that as a calling card. And I went to my friends at public service and I said, you know, we have osprey looking for places to nest because now we have fish back in the river. Wouldn't it be great if you guys could put up some artificial nest boxes? That's an artificial nest box. They put up about a dozen of them. And then they looked at me and said, well, where are the birds? And I said, oh, we wait. When they find it, they will come. And sure enough, it took a couple of years. But then we had the very first pair of osprey to give birth in the Meadowlands right there on the box. And every year now, they come back and they come back and they come back. And the best part about osprey is the young, once they're fledged and once they're ready to go, they go south for about 2 or 3 years. But when nature calls and they're getting ready to breed, they go back to the river where they were born or the place where they were born, and they look for a nesting spot. We went from 0 active osprey nests to now we have well over 20, probably about 27 or 28 of them spread out around the Meadowlands, the lower river, even up in the even upriver. You know, like these birds are just coming back like gangbusters. And if you ever watched one when it's coming in for a fish, they fly over the river about 100 feet in the air, and when they're up there, their head is down. They're looking. And when they see a fish that they think they can handle, yes, they can see fish from all the way up there. They'll slowly trap that fish, and they figure out the wind shear, the distance, the current, the direction the fish is traveling in. And after they do all that math in their bird brains, they dive right onto the fish, grab it with their talons, and take it home and eat it. And I've watched it happen hundreds of times. There's the Pulaski Skyway. Pulaski Skyway, and next to it is the out of commission Kearney generating station. That's been out of commission for a long time. It's what they call in the business a stranded asset. It would cost more to remove it than it does to just leave it there and let it be whatever, you know. But like I said, the power plant in Jersey City that they were running, that's not there anymore. That was the last coal-fired power plant in North Jersey. And I started talking with public service about doing something about it from the very first. And when the opportunity presented itself, they took it out. They tore that one down, and they tore the one down in Trenton. It was the last 2 coal-fired power plants in the state that they owned. And now the property has been redeveloped for warehouses, but the main thing is the pollution isn't there anymore. They're not burning coal anymore. You know, like in the most densely populated part of the state, they had this coal furnace that was just throwing mercury and all kinds of other contaminants right up into the air that you all have to breathe. Because you know that the wind is predominantly from the west, and you're due west from where that plant was. That's looking down North Bay. That's the bridge that's under, and there's a lot of controversy about that bridge now. That is the Turnpike extension that connects from Newark Airport to the Holland Tunnel. And the one behind it is the Lehigh Valley Bridge. That's a freight bridge that services the port in the North Elizabeth area. And that's the port. That's a segment of the port, a very, very small segment of the port. But it gives you an idea, the cranes, the containers, the ships, Newark Bay, it is what it is. The east side is Bayonne, and Bayonne has parks all along the bay. The west side is Newark and Elizabeth, and that's what they got. Okay, oh. Can you see that back? Okay. So I hate to put up slides and then read them, you know? I'd rather talk about the pictures. But this is something that we used quite a bit back in the day. That quote over there from Harry Truman, and that should be said out loud by as many people as can say it. You know, we have to remain constantly vigilant to prevent raids by those who would selfishly exploit our common heritage for their private gain. Such raids on our natural resources are not examples of enterprise and initiative. They are attempts to take from all of the people for the benefit of a few. And that was Harry Truman. You know, Harry Truman that dropped the atomic bombs on Japan, he knew that natural resources were important. And here's just a couple of statistics of what we were able to accomplish over the years. 8,400 acres of wetlands in the Meadowlands in 1990. In 2004, we finally got the Meadowlands Commission at the time to approve a new master plan, which rezoned all of the remaining wetlands for conservation, throwing a huge roadblock in front of developers. Because not only would they have to get all the permits from the Army and the state, they'd also have to get a zoning change. And if anybody's ever been involved in a zoning change, that can take years, you know? The 3,300 woodland acres, they belong to United Water. And United Water had a habit back in the early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s. They were, without talking to anybody about it, they were letting people use the land around the reservoirs for untoward uses, like landscapers and there was one place right by the reservoir was a exterminator, you know, like these landscapers, exterminators, they always had poison around, and the water company was letting them use land that was purchased by the water company for the exclusive purpose of being a buffer for the water. Well, when we got them in front of the Board of Public Utilities, they were told, go back and come back to us, and we want to see every land transaction that you've done for the last 10 years. And we all went to our neutral corners. They came back a couple of months later begging to be let off the hook because they had already gone through all of the files that they had, the live files that they had, and they had found 168 violations of the Watershed Moratorium Act. And I looked at the guy from BPU and I said, I think I spot a trend here. And so it was decided at that meeting that we wouldn't make them go to the warehouse where the rest of their records were stored. We were going to go with what we had. And that was what led to the negotiations, that they actually put a green acres easement on 3,300 acres of wooded areas around the reservoirs and around the river that they owned. You still can't get there. They still got fences around it all. But at least it's not going to be used for exterminators. In the early 20s, we were fighting like hell because of combined sewer overflows. I don't know if you know what combined sewer is, but in towns like this, in Jersey City and several towns upriver, Hackensack, Ridgefield Park, they have these sewer systems that rely on one set of pipes. Normal weather, you know, sunshine, all the sewage in the pipes goes to the sewage treatment plant, gets treated to the highest level that it can be, and then we're good. But as soon as it starts raining, it could be as little as a quarter of an inch of rain, that'll trigger an overflow because there's not enough capacity in the system to hold the rainwater with the human sewage, the human waste. So then these registers open up, and I got a picture of one. I think you're going to see it in a minute. The $4 billion cleanup of the Honeywell site and the 2016 public access court victory. During the Christie administration, they tried to float a public access rule for the whole state. We went to meetings with them, and we talked to them, and we said, do it right, or we're going to sue you. And they went ahead and they did it wrong. They provided great public access to the beaches and to the bays down in the shore area. But when it came to the northern waters from Raritan River north, they had no rules at all. That meant that anybody who wanted to keep the public away from their water could do it. So we did. They called our bluff. We sued them. And we won the case in appeals court. Not only did we win the case, they had to tear up the rule. They had to remove from the state register the regulations that supported their rule and have to make a new rule that would be inclusive for everybody. We're still working on it because, thank goodness, the Christie administration was gone. And under the Murphy administration, the DEP was working on a new rule. And Sean LaTourette, who's the DEP commissioner, he took one look at what they were working on and he tore it up. He said, you guys don't learn? Now get back to work, They were letting the same people that worked for Christie do the new rule. Not a good way to run the show, This is what used to be the Standard Chlorine Company in Kearney, right next to the river. You would drive by here on a boat during the hot weather, and the smell of mothballs would go right up your nose because that was one of the products that they handled there, that they made there. It was a big, giant, sprawling complex, and for years, we couldn't figure out what to do with it. Finally, we found the ability to sue them, and we sent them a notice. Under the law, nonprofit organizations must give 90 days notice to the polluter that you're coming for them. And if they can fix the problem within those 90 days, then you don't go to court. But if they can't fix the problem within 90 days, then you go and you file your case. Within 2 weeks of them getting our letter of intent that we intended to sue them, they called us for a meeting. And we had several meetings at Rutgers Law School with them and our attorneys at the time. And they promised they would clean the site up. And they kept us involved in the entire thing. They put in on the property, well, these buildings, in order to take those buildings down, they literally had to wrap them in plastic and disassemble them and put everything into dumpsters that were covered. And then they had to go to hazardous waste disposal site. That's how bad those buildings were. And the property itself, they put in 70 groundwater recovery wells and a water treatment plant. So all of the groundwater on the property gets treated before it gets into the river. And we were able to do that without suing them, with just the threat. But that came on the heels of our biggest case. That's another shot of the Standard Chlorine. Every 6 months or so, as the progress was being made, they would hold meetings on the property with us to show us what they were doing. They were, by the time they were done, they were very proud of themselves. Getting them started was a bitch. This is the PJP landfill in Jersey City. Soon to be a park on the PJP landfill. When Jerry Healy was mayor of Jersey City, he called me in and he said, Bill, I might not get reelected. I want to see a park on PJP landfill. Would you be so kind as to take a conservation easement on it? And I checked with the EPA and they said that the remediation was finished. So I took the easement. And the idea was that we would have a park on the southern part of the PJP, on the south side of what they call the SIP ditch. Well, we're still waiting for the park because Steve Fuller just jerked our chain for the last 8 years. We got him, we nailed him down, and he promised us that before he leaves office, all of the preliminary work will be done. So when he turns over PJP to the next administration, it's going to be what they like to call shovel ready. Yeah, it better be. And that's another picture of the PJP. That's after all that plastic that you saw, that's not plastic, that's geotextile membrane. And when they do a landfill, when they close it, first thing they do is they have to manage the material, make it tight and make it where it's supposed to be. Then they put a geotextile cap over it. And that is impervious. Water can't get through, water can't get out. And then on top of that, they put several layers of gravel and sand and topsoil, and gravel and sand and topsoil until they get the height that they want and they know that they've got it all pinned up. And so now that's waiting. It's waiting for the contractors to come and build a park. And this is the biggest case we ever did. This is a Honeywell International became the responsible party. The original pollution was done by a company in Jersey City that was a chromium refining company. And all of the chromium waste was pumped across what today is 1 and 9 and dumped right into the river, into the wetlands. And they made this whole peninsula. You see how it sticks out from the city? It sticks out into the river. That's all chrome. And we watched Society Hill get built on chrome, and we watched people starting to get sick from living there. And I guess it was around 2000, I was at a Waterkeeper conference, and an engineer that was working on a case, he said, when we get back to Jersey, I want to go out on the boat with you. I got something I want to show you. And so I said, sure. We went for a ride, went down to Jersey City, and he told me the story of what was going on there. And I had no choice. I said, of course we'll jump. And so we filed a Resource Conservation and Recovery Act case. They call that RCRA for short. We filed a RCRA case against the Honeywell International Corporation, and people thought we were out of our minds because Honeywell is one of the biggest companies in the world. Well, the first case, we went in front of Judge Kavanaugh with a C in Newark, and he ruled in our favor. He told Honeywell they would have to excavate, remove all of the chromium on this site here, what we're looking at on the bottom half of that. They had to remove all of the chromium, which meant that they would have to dig down about 30 feet to get it all out of there. And they started here at the river. Why am I walking around? Sorry. But right here, this is the river. They started right here with this bulkhead, and then they dug down, put in a berm, backfilled it with clean soil, went to the next set, all the way till they got to the highway, to Route 440 or whatever that is there. The trucks that they hauled the stuff away in, they had to build a truck wash on the property because the trucks needed to be covered. Like all of the dump trucks, I mean, thousands of dump trucks moved that chromium waste out of Jersey City. And every one of them had a plastic liner inside the bed that when the truck was full, the guy would jump up on top, fold it over like a burrito and seal it so nothing could get out. And then they would take the truck to the truck wash where they would make sure that there wasn't any chromium waste clinging to the wheels, the tires, the undercarriage of the truck, clean it all up. And then we forced them to take it all the way to Pennsylvania before it could be loaded on a train. They originally planned to take it to North Bergen and transfer it onto a train in North Bergen. But the transfer station that they had in North Bergen, we closed that down. It was an illegal transfer station. They never even had a permit for it. And when the commissioner, not back then, Commissioner Campbell came and he went to the property and they chased him off the property. And he said, "That's the last time you're going to do that." And they made him take it out. So they had no choice but to move all that waste. You know where it wound up? It wound up on an Indian reservation out in Idaho. And it's a licensed hazardous waste disposal site operated by the EPA, so that it's not going to get out of there. And the good news is, if it does get out of there, Honeywell will be on the hook for cleaning that up too. So the ownership of the pollution never goes away. After we sued them for this area right here, which was known on the maps as Area 7, this is Area 6A and Area 6 over here. I don't know why they did it that way, but they did. We had to sue them again. The first case we won hands down. So when we sued them again for the other two pieces, they looked at it and said, "We better settle with these guys because we know what the judge is going to do to us if we get to the judge." Well, we stuck to our guns, and we got them to agree that everything on the Kellogg Street side and everything up by where the MUA was, anywhere that they planned on building, they would have to remove and excavate all of the chromium on the site. The only place they could leave it was two strips, that one a little bit wider than the other, to put parks in to the community that they hope to put there. And in order to make sure that there's going to be parks there, guess who owns the easements? Yeah, Riverkeeper took the easements on these two strips of land, and we have controls on the property. You know, like, we worked hard on this. It was several years worth of work, but now it's at the stage now where all the remediation is done, and they're starting very slowly. They're starting with the redevelopment of the site. Eventually, it will be. I won't live to see it. You know, I probably won't live to see it built out, but there's going to be a walkway along the edge. There's going to be we're trying to get a bridge to connect to the Society Hill walkway across the creek, you know? So yeah, we're working on that. It's still a work in progress. And that is one of Hackensack's CSOs. See the size of that hatch? You could drive a Volkswagen into that thing. When that opens up, the river turns brown. It's a mess. And there's a public access. We got several of the places that we've either been involved in or we use. They're all listed on that side of the map. And that picture, I always like that picture. It's an older picture, but I like it because it's got people in the water. And it proves the point that you can, if you get people to the water's edge, you can't keep them out of it, you know? So it has to meet water quality standards if people are going to go in it, right? And in order to serve the communities as well as we can, we have these programs. Our eco cruises were the founding program. You know, I said, this is nuts. Nobody knows what's out here. I got to start taking people out on my boat. And then that evolved into everything that you've seen on the screen today. And there we are out on the sawmill. Yeah, that's a bunch of kids from one of our education programs. What? Oh, I didn't know I had to do that again. That's interesting. River cleanups. This kid, Jeff, has been volunteering for us for 10 years, 15 years almost. And we had a cleanup and the canoes weren't being used. He had his kayak. So we gave him a canoe and he towed it with his kayak and came back with all that. And that was in Lake DeForest, part of our drinking water supply. You know, I always want big truck tires and stuff in my drinking water, don't you? And that's just the results of some of our cleanups over the years. Last year we did about 40 cleanups, and I think we took out roughly about somewhere between 25 and 30,000 pounds of garbage. You know, we did one the other day. Our first cleanup of the season happened yesterday, at Carney Point. You have to see the results. It's crazy. And there we are, taking the kiddies out because they're the ones that are going to inherit this mess. And we want it to be better for them than it was for us, don't we? That would be the most logical thing to do. Teach a kid to fish, he'll never go hungry. And this is a classroom exercise. We have a model of a watershed, and it shows them how when the water falls on the land, anything laying on the land winds up in the water. And our paddle centers. That's a nice moonlight shot. We load them up around 6:30, 7 o'clock in the summertime, and they push off. And as the sun goes down, they watch the sunset, and then they turn their boats around, and the moon rises behind the Empire State Building. And it's really gorgeous. It's magical, you know. Those tours sell out every time. And then the water company. Remember I told you that story about how we sued the water company? Well, as soon as we were done, we started doing programs with the water company. The first time in the history of the United Water Company, the Hackensack Water Company, and the subsequent owners, for the very first time, people were allowed to recreate on the reservoir. We hold it every year, the first weekend in June. We call it Reservoir Challenge. And we have races in the morning, a 5K and a 10K race, and then we have leisurely paddles in the afternoon. We usually have a band playing up on land, and we have food brought in. ShopRite always gives us sandwiches and stuff, and we have a great time. The first time we did it, I was standing there with this guy. He was the senior vice president with the company at the time, and he was the guy I worked with to get this thing started. And when the thing was all over and we had everything packed up and we were ready to leave, I said, "Look, Rich, all the water's still there." They didn't take it home with them. And now every year we do an annual paddle on the reservoir in the Oradell Reservoir. We also do one at Lake Tapan, which is more of just an open paddle where people just can go out and explore. And we do one up in Lake DeForest, which is up on the New York side of the border, you know. So we're trying to service as much of the watershed as we can. We're still a small organization, but we're doing the best we can. That's another shot of the fishing pier we built, and give you an idea of when we have a fishing derby. You look at all those kids having a good time. And this is from our Earth Fest. We have next month, in May, we do Earth Fest up in Overpeck Park in Leonia, Richfield Park area of Teaneck. And when we started it, we had this thing that we would do. We called it the Recycled Regatta. And we had schools and other people would participate, and they had to build their own boat and it had to be out of recycled material. It couldn't be any store-bought material in the boat, maybe some tape or maybe, stuff like that. But take a look at the creativity of some of those boats. And that's the result of some of those boats too, right there. See? That's a boat. Underneath those people, they did make it back to shore, but we had to drag everything out of the boat, out of the lake. But these are always a fun time. People have a good time. And these are some of the people that work for me. Some of them are gone now, but I have replacements. We just haven't changed the slide. And that's about it for the slideshow. But when people finally find their way to the river, you cannot keep them out of it. It's dogma for me. All right. I'm ready to do questions.
Let's just give an applause. We'll take a few questions, and I guess if you could repeat the question.
All right. I don't know how to do.
Holly?
Right there.
What's happening with the EPA, federal EPA? Are there threats to what you're doing, or is it going to protect you, or mostly involved?
Well, everybody has a copy of my newsletter on their lap, right? You look at that article on the front page about Hudson County and Hackensack Riverkeeper partnering. The Trump administration pulled that grant. We found out they sent an email Friday night to the county planning department. Friday night, I mean, planning department, nobody there, saying that the grant was canceled by the Trump administration. Thank you very much, Donald. You know, we had planned to offer our services for free to the public, for the first time really for free to the public, because the grant was supposed to pay our costs. You know, it costs a lot to keep a boat and to fuel a boat, and my time and Yui's time and the equipment that we have to buy and replace all the time, you know. So partnering with Hudson County seemed like a really good idea, and it was. And we worked really hard with the county for about 1.5 years on the grant application alone. And last October, the EPA announced that Hudson County qualified for the grant, that we were taking the ride with them. And like I said, Friday night, we lost it. So now we're in the process now of trying to rearrange our calendar so that we're able to get a program going again this year. You know, we had changed everything to accommodate the grant. Now the grant's gone away. Now we got to go back to the old school way of doing things, but we already had people signed up for the Hudson County trips. How do you tell them, sorry, you can't come? You know, it puts me in a really bad space. You know, why do I have an attitude about what's going on in Washington? That was the deal breaker right there. You know, like I haven't had any fun with the idea to begin with. And then they made it personal by taking away the money that Riverkeeper direly needed to do these programs.
So thank you, this is really illuminating. So the other question, is there anything that the governor can do about this?
Good idea.
I don't know how much Governor Murphy can do in the few months that he has left, but New Jersey has always had stronger and stricter environmental laws than the federal government. New Jersey was one of the few states that was granted authority by the EPA to issue permits and to manage our water resources. Every other state, I think all but one other state, they have to go through the EPA. If somebody wants a permit to do something, they can't get a local permit from the state. They have to go to the federal government. You know, and New Jersey has the Freshwater Wetlands Protection Act that Maureen Ogden finally got through the legislature years and years ago. And those laws are more strident than anything that the federal government works with. So EPA was giving New Jersey a lot of leeway to manage our resources. In New Jersey, you know, nothing's ever perfect, especially when you're dealing with government. But I can tell you, I'd rather deal with New Jersey than deal with the feds any day. You know?
I have a second question, actually. So Charles has been using all these ads, you know, different styles and everything, saturation advertising for the government thing. And so it looks like there's much more at stake in the governmental election.
Oh, for sure.
And so, do you have any idea? I mean, you mentioned that he's kind of a creep or something. You mentioned that he's kind of a creep, and I wondered, should we be reconsidering support or anything like that?
Oh, we can. We're a nonprofit. We're
Okay.
we're 501c3.
Okay, so here's my.
I can't tell you who to vote for.
No. It's okay. I think it's a much larger problem.
If you ask me, should I vote for somebody, I could answer negative or positive, but I can't tell you to vote for them.
Oh, okay. So my question here was, I'm one of those people who commuted from Hoboken to New Brunswick.
Oh,
And Sea Caucus Junction changed my life.
I'm sure.
And so I never considered the eco consequences.
Uh-huh.
So I'm illuminated about that. But what I'm curious about is they named it the Lautenberg transfer, whatever it was.
Mm-hmm.
And they named Penn Station the Moynihan Station. Okay, so now people call that Moynihan, but they call Sea Caucus Sea Caucus. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that.
They call what? I heard it. I know about Penn Station in New York.
But
It's Moynihan
called
Station.
Moynihan,
Right.
okay, in the popular discourse.
I know who he was. Yeah.
Well, right, okay, but I'm saying that people who don't know who Peter were will know Moynihan's name historically. But they won't know Lautenberg's name because people refer to it as the Sea Caucus Junction.
Right.
I was curious about that.
Well, for years, that's what it was called.
Yeah.
You know, when they first put it up, that's what they called it, the Sea Caucus Junction. Yeah, but then afterwards, I think it was after he died.
Right, but I'm saying that the popular reception will know who Moynihan is because of that building.
Mhm.
Will not know who Lautenberg is because of that. It's called Sea Caucus.
Yeah. If you're on the train, you can't see the sign that says Lautenberg. You have to be on the street. Yes, sir.
Having been on a couple of the pontoon boat tours, I remember wasn't you said that the saline level, because of those dams further up the Hackensack River, that the saline level during the 20s and 30s had risen so high that it killed all the plants except for one that had grown there. Is there any way of reversing that, or is that?
Well, it's slowly but surely, you know, it's a long-term healing process. We had a freshwater river all the way down to Sea Caucus. And when they put the dams in mostly around the turn of the 20th century, just a little bit before, a little bit after, that was when they blocked the fresh water. And the tide pushes the salt wedge further and further up the river. And, you know, because we had Atlantic white cedar trees in the Meadowlands, and as soon as the salt got on the cedar trees, they died. We had all of the obligate species that would live in a freshwater swamp. They all died. And what they were replaced by the Phragmites, or common reed, which is what people always associate with the Meadowlands. That's that plant with the tassels on the top of it. Looks almost like skinny bamboo or something, right? But you know, the people used to say, "Oh, that's an invasive species. We have to take it out of there. We're going to build a warehouse and get rid of all that Phragmites for you." They actually said things like that back in the 80s and 90s. We're going to get rid of that bad plant. Let us develop it. No. The bad plant is a placeholder. It was a placeholder, and in some places in the Meadowlands, it continues to be a placeholder because nature doesn't punch a clock. Nature does things at its own rate. And slowly but surely, about 20 years ago, we started seeing Spartina alterniflora, which is a preferred saltwater marsh or brackish water marsh plant. And it was first along the river in clumps. Then it moved into the sawmill. Then it moved into the Mill Creek. And then it's all over the place now. And wherever the Spartina takes hold, the Phragmites falls back. And they've been pushing the Phragmites in and out, and it's been falling away. So I would expect in another 20 years, Phragmites is only going to be on the very disturbed areas of the Meadowlands, and everything else is going to be brackish water marshes that have the plants I was talking about, the Spartina plants and stuff like that, because that's what's supposed to be here, you know?
Yes. Somebody from Facebook asked you,
Can you give any updates about efforts to connect greenway sections elsewhere on the river?
What do I mean by elsewhere? Because I'm involved with Bergen County. I'm on their Open Space Trust Fund. I chair that. And several of the projects that we've done over the years have contributed to the walkway. And in Hudson County, we have the Hackensack River Greenway Work Group. I think that's what they call it. Anyway, we're involved with them. And, eventually we want to see, in Hudson, we want to see from Bayonne up to Secaucus, free and accessible river. And we could do it. And, that's why we have this working group. Everybody's looking at the properties that are not open to the public and figuring out what we had to do in order to get them open to the public. So yeah, that's a work in progress. And on the Bergen County end, we have the same thing going on with the Bergen County open space people. So yeah, public access is the number one thing. The reason why our rivers got so bad in the first place is because nobody was allowed to go by the rivers except the people that were polluting them. And my dad was one of them. He worked out of Hoboken here with actually it was the Lackawanna Railroad turned into the Erie Lackawanna. But back in the day, he would take me to work like it was a big deal to take me out on the barge. And I was like, this is disgusting. Have to go to the bathroom. Well, there was a hole in the deck and it went right down to the river, there was no sewage holding on the boats. It was a mess. It's gotten a lot better. The Clean Water Act is doing its job. RECRA has done its job. The Superfund law has done its job. But there's still a lot of work to do. And that's why organizations like Hackensack Riverkeeper must be on the job all the time, especially now. They're dismantling the EPA. They're dismantling all of the protections that we had and could rely on. So, my lawyer is scratching her head and saying, how are we going to get to this one, But we'll do it. We'll do it. We've got really good people. Any more questions? You got one? Oh, one of your own. Okay. Might as well.
Do you have any insight or things to share about what's happening, like in the metropolitan region, like Jamaica Bay or your neighbor, the Passaic River, or anything good, anything bad?
Well, the Passaic River, I believe they're supposed to get shovels in the ground or in the bottom of the river for the first time, either late this year or early next year. My lawyer, my staff attorney that works for me, she's also the co-chair of the Citizens Advisory Group on the Passaic. And so I let her handle that. And, she'll call me in when I'm necessarily, like if I have to go yell at somebody, But we got that under control. Years ago, as an adjunct to what we do on the Hackensack, I was invited, well, I kind of whittled my way into it. The city of Newark hired a guy to do a waterfront master plan. They said, this is because if you ever look on the Passaic River at the Newark waterfront, you'd know they needed a plan. So we were at a conference and I met the guy that was the planner that they hired specifically to do that. And he said, nobody even knows what I'm talking about, Bill. I said, yeah, well, it's a city. I said, you got to take a page from my book. I said, when nobody knew what was going on in the Meadowlands, I started taking them on boat rides. And I started showing people 5, 6, 8, 10 at a time what was there. And people started recognizing the Meadowlands was something worth fighting for. So we made a deal, and to this day, we're still doing it. Several weekends out of the summer, we take our boats from the Hackensack up the Passaic to Newark, pick up people at Jackson Street Bridge where they have the dock, and then we take them on a tour of the lower part of the Passaic River, and we're working with the city of Newark Planning Department on that. And like I said, they over the first couple of years that we were doing it, and they were still working on the master plan, we were all moving towards that day when the master plan would come up. And when it did, the Newark Council, who rarely agree on anything, voted unanimously to adopt that new master plan for the waterfront. So working with, the guy's name was Damon, working with Damon was good, and he got it done. You know, he's moved on since, but we're still with the planning department there. One more.
Does the Riverkeeper have any thoughts of what to do with the submarine wing? I mean, would be,
We really don't have anything to do with it.
would be,
The Ling is one of the most sorrowful stories on the river from my perspective. It was started with all the best intentions by a group of submariners that were part of World War II. When they came home, they wanted to do a naval museum in Hackensack. And the guy who owned the Bergen Record said, I'll give you the land. And he said, you can put your museum on my property. And just down from the printing plant, right on the river, he gave him that plot of land. And they put a couple of side-by-side trailers there, and they brought a bunch of equipment in. They had naval equipment there. They had a plastic boat like they use in Vietnam. They had other missiles and weapons of mass destruction on display there, you know, and it was a really popular spot. And kids would go there and they would have overnight sleepovers on the submarine with the kids. It was really an asset for the community and for the county. But they ran it like a club. And the guys that founded it, the guys that convinced the Navy it was a good idea to give them the submarine in the first place, well, they were all World War II veterans. My dad was a World War II veteran. There aren't too many of them left. Matter of fact, there's fewer of them than anything else. And they never brought young people up to take over. You know, that's why I have younger people working for me, so that something happens to me, the organization will continue. But they never planned for that. I guess they thought they were going to live forever, or they thought somebody would bail them out. I don't know, but it got really nasty towards the end, and Sandy was the death knell. Sandy was the death knell. Shortly after Sandy, the Navy came, and all of the equipment and stuff that they had on display on land, they took that away, a couple of truckloads of stuff. But the submarine is stuck in the mud. And when they brought that submarine up, it was towed up by a Navy tug and parked in Hackensack, and the Navy tug left. But at that time, the Route 46 bridge would open and close on demand. Today, the bridge don't open. So if they sent the tug up to pull that boat out, they would get about 2 miles down, 1.5 miles downriver, and they'd have to stop because they can't get under the bridge. You know, from my perspective, unfortunately, I think the only thing that they can do, well, yeah, they have to do something, because the real estate people that bought all of the record property and built all of those apartments, they sent an eviction notice to the submarine developers. You got to love them, you know. They actually sent an eviction notice to a submarine, and I was like, how are you going to do that? Right? Is the sheriff going to come and put it on the curb if they don't get it out of it? What is that? But anyway, it's still there, and I still get questions about it incessantly. I get calls at the office. Hey, what are you going to do about that Ling? I can't do anything about the Ling. I don't own it, and I wouldn't if they offered it to me. All right. Thank you, everybody. All right, Bob.
Let's stand it.
Good.
All right, thank
Yes.
you so much.
That's-
When you were relaying all this information, I was thinking, how many meetings do you go to in a year?
I don't count.
Okay, it's a lot. It's a
You know.
lot.
I'm a 7-day-a-week guy.
Uh-huh.
You know, during the season, I'm out on the boat on the weekends.
Gotcha.
All year round, you know, they call like you guys. You want to come down on a Sunday afternoon? Of course I will.
Sure.
I'm going to say it's not working hours. It's always working.
And then my question is, you're on one of the, what's your favorite park at sunset?
Oh, right by the Sawmill Creek.
Sawmill
That's the
Creek.
best. That's where we end the evening tours that we do. And as we're pulling into the dock to let the people off, the sun is going down.
Gotcha.
Everybody oohs and ahs a lot.
Okay. Thank you, Bill. Wow. So kind of a legend. I mean, he's really been in it from the early years and he's still doing it. I like when you were talking about you need to get an office, you need to own the office, but then I'm thinking you need to get a good lawyer. So that was the other part of that equation. I'm just going to mention that on May 3rd, we're going to be meeting in Richard DeCourt Park, and we're doing a birding walk with Don DeLeo and Don Torino. Don Torino. I actually typed it in wrong on my calendar. And if you'll get more information on that, if you log on to our website and sign up for the newsletter. And we've actually booked 2 tours on June 28th on that was going to be subsidized part of that grant with Hudson County. We'll kind of figure it out. So if people are interested, we still have room for maybe 4 or 5 people at 10 a.m. on June 28th, the Saturday. And the evening one is actually booked at this point. So it got booked as people were coming in the door. But if anyone is interested in that tour is going to leave from Laurel Hill Park. That's where High Tech is also, right? That part. The high school is there too. The other end, but nearby. Okay, close to the Lautenberg train station. Snake Hill or? Yeah. Okay, Laurel Hill. You can sign up right now, okay, to do this. Okay, I'm going to walk Bill back to the parking garage just so he doesn't get disoriented. He wants to see reeds and flora and fauna, but he won't see any going over there. Okay, again, thanks for coming. Thank you, museum staff. Thank you, Rand Hoppe, for doing it. Kind of fun to get some Facebook questions. Yeah.